Hello, everybody. My name is Kyle. This is episode 16 of the Old Glory Games podcast. I'm here with my buddy, my pal, Greg, and we're here talking about a person that some of you may not have heard of, but when it comes to pitching and being intimidating, I'm sure you've heard of maybe Walter Johnson, Mr. Randy Johnson, but Bob Gibson is probably the guy that, at least in contemporary history, most people feared. Now, Randy Johnson, I must say, he's up there, but Bob Gibson is neck and neck with him. What do you think, Greg?
Oh, I agree. Bob Gibson, and not everybody may know who he is, or you may have somewhat heard of him. But as I was telling you before we went on air, I didn't have a chance to watch Bob Gibson in his prime. I think he retired in 1975, and I really didn't start watching baseball as a kid until around that time. But he was just so dominant, and I think as a kid, I more remember him for the commercials he did, maybe like right after his career. I think he did some Primatene Mist commercials, you know, that spray that you inhale to help breathing, I think, or something. I don't even know if they still sell or not, but I think I remember him doing.
Haven't seen that in a while.
Yeah, that's real old school. I think I remember him doing those commercials, but
get it back, Greg.
Yeah, yeah. So, unfortunately, I don't recall seeing him play as a kid, but I think what I'm about to read to you will give you a feel for just how dominant of a pitcher he was. So Tim McCarver, who I'm familiar with because he went on to play for my Phillies, at that time he was the catcher for the Cardinals when Gibson played for them. And McCarver said he's the luckiest pitcher I ever saw. He always pitches when the other team doesn't score any runs.
I heard that. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, so 1968, when you talk about Bob Gibson, you talk about 1968 because that was his best year, and that was also a very dominant year for pitchers in general in the major leagues. But so because pitchers led by Gibson were so dominant in that year, that baseball lowered the pitching mound 5 inches and shrank the strike zone. The changes became known as the Gibson rules. Okay. So how dominant was Bob Gibson in 1968? Gibson authored the greatest season by a pitcher in modern history. He had a 22-9 record with a 1.12 ERA, 13 shutouts, and 268 strikeouts. He threw 28 complete games. I'll repeat that. 28 complete games. To give you an idea as to how impressive that is, no active pitcher has yet to even reach 30 career complete games, and he did 28 in one season. So he was named the.
Let's go back and say that one more time for the audience, just so they can.
Oh, okay. So please. In 1968, Gibson threw 28 complete games. That means he pitched the entire game. No active pitcher has yet to even reach 30 career complete games. That tells you what kind of stud he was.
Let me ask you a question. I'm going to cut you off. I'm not trying to be rude here, but let me ask you a question. Did he throw just all breaking balls?
I don't think so.
He threw too hard. That's what I'm saying. He threw hard. That's the point.
Yeah, he intimidated guys. And he pitched during an era where pitchers did not hesitate to back you off the plate if you were crowding the plate, or if you got a hit or a home run off of them and they felt like you were clowning them. The next time you came up, they're going to plunk you. I mean, this is back when pitchers could be like that and be dominant and say, hey, that plate belongs to me, and you're going to pay a price if you encroach upon it or do something that I think is disrespectful to me. That's how the game was played then. He was named the NL Cy Young Award winner and MVP. He recorded 17 strikeouts in Game 1 of the 1968 World Series. 17. He also recorded, during June and July of 1968, Gibson pitched 47 consecutive scoreless innings. And at that time, that was the third longest scoreless streak in Major League history. So at home, he pitched 18 games. His ERA was 1.41. He pitched 160 innings, allowed 111 hits, had 25 earned runs, 34 runs, 7 home runs, walked 18 batters, only one intentionally, threw only one wild pitch, and hit batters 3 times, balked 0 times. On the road, he was even better. He pitched 16 games on the road, had an ERA of .81. Less than 1. When have you ever heard of a pitcher, a starting pitcher, have an ERA of less than 1?
Explain what it means. Some of our audience just may not know what ERA means.
It's earned run average, and I think that's per 9 innings, if I'm not mistaken. So while I continue, put that on the screen to confirm what I'm saying. But yeah, it stands for earned run average, and I think that's per 9 innings, if I'm not mistaken. All right, so he pitched on the road 144.2 innings, only allowed 87 hits, had 13 earned runs, 15 runs, and 4 home runs, walked 44 batters, 5 intentionally, threw 2 wild pitches, hit 4 batters, and balked 0 times. So that season, I think, cemented Bob Gibson's legacy. Not that the seasons prior to that were any slouch by any stretch, but I think this season in 1968 defined his legend. And also, I didn't know this, but he was a great college basketball player. He played for Creighton University, which I believe is in, yeah, there we go, earned run average. So there it is.
Yeah, you're.
Can you read that?
It's not innings. It's essentially the formula for finding ERA is 9 times earned runs, innings pitched.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, it's basically what I said. So yeah, thank you for that. So he became Creighton's first black varsity basketball and baseball player. He set school basketball scoring records that stood until Paul Silas, you know who he is, who later played for the St. Louis Hawks, broke them near a decade later. Bob Gibson's Creighton records helped make him a member of the College All-Stars, giving him a chance to play against the Harlem Globetrotters. Now, back then, the Globetrotters weren't just a purely entertainment basketball team you see today. I think back then they were actually playing competitive games against different teams.
They were.
Yeah. So Gibson's team actually beat the Globetrotters, who were never supposed to lose, beat them by 1 point. His performance in that game got him an invitation in 1957 to join the Globetrotters. I did not know he played for the Globetrotters, but I think that one season he played for the just amazing. So yeah, he was a Globetrotter too. And his roommate was Meadowlark Lemon. So that's interesting too. Yeah.
That's that old school.
Yeah. So I love it.
Curly. Him and Curly.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And Curly went to Winston-Salem State, didn't he?
I had no idea. I didn't know.
Or Guilford, one or two. I'd have to look it up. But yeah, he's certainly a legendary Globetrotter as well. So Bob Gibson became the Cardinals' all-time leader in innings pitched, 3,884, wins, 251, strikeouts, 3,117. He was the second pitcher to surpass 3,000 strikeouts, complete games, 255. Now, I've already told you that pitchers today, they typically only have like a handful of complete games in their entire careers. He had 255, 56 shutouts. During his 17 years, he won 2 Cy Young Awards and 9 Gold Gloves. And he also hit 24 home runs back when pitchers actually hit.
What?
Yeah. That's not shabby. 24 home runs. So,
I don't know.
Yeah. So just an incredible numbers and an incredible career. And I think when anybody talks about the greatest pitchers of all time, you cannot make a list without Bob Gibson. And anything that I've seen as far as highlights, as far as his teammates talking about him, opponents, they just talked about his intensity, his competitiveness. He certainly did not like to lose. And something else that speaks to his intensity was, I think, part of the reason why he didn't stay with the Globetrotters longer. He didn't like the clowning aspect of their play, even back then. You know, he's a pretty serious guy. So you can look at that picture and see the intensity on his face. Bob Gibson was the real deal. And again, I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to see him play when I was a kid, but there's certainly plenty of video out there for everybody to go check out. But you know, you may say that some guys, oh, well, they're overrated. No, not this guy. He was the absolute truth. And players like this in any sport, I always enjoy talking about, because that harkens back to a time when I enjoyed watching sports even more than I do now. It's just an incredible testament to not just his ability, but just the level of play at that particular time in baseball history. So what are your thoughts on Bob Gibson and the numbers I read out? I mean, just amazing. When I saw some of them, I'm like, that's unbelievable, especially when you compare those numbers to pitchers' numbers of today. There's really no comparison in a lot of those categories.
Well, they're absolutely staggering. And I think one thing that comes to mind is the endurance to play that sort of baseball where you're pitching 9 innings. That's unheard of today. The mid-relief pitcher now is like a thing now, and this is probably going to be a Hall of Famer at some point in time, if there hasn't been already, of just a person who only pitches 2 innings a game, if that, maybe 1 inning a game. And so, because that's the strategy now, so keep those guys fresh. But Bob Gibson, I mean, if you look at a list, now I've looked at many lists, and I'm going through Ken Burns' baseball documentary. I haven't got to him yet. He's more later. But you look at people like Walter Johnson. He's like, most people say he's probably the greatest pitcher of all time. Cy Young is also considered one of the greatest pitchers of all time, but he came before a lot of the major records and stuff. And of course, Randy Johnson's, he's more contemporary, but he's considered. But of all the pitchers in terms of just all the categories, Bob Gibson is in all of them. This particular one is this is actually Sports Illustrated, the most intimidating pitchers of all time. I wouldn't consider Koufax an intimidating pitcher. He was just a great pitcher. Roger Clemens definitely. Nolan Ryan, definitely. But, I mean, and Randy Johnson, absolutely. And Walter Johnson, to me, he's my favorite pitcher of all time, mainly because he pitched for the Washington Senators. I'm a Washington guy. But it's a short list, Greg. That's my point. And Bob Gibson, I think he harkens so much of what I say as old school, no nonsense, get the job done, pain, sweat, tears. It is what it is. Don't, sugarcoat anything. I'm going to leave the Globetrotters because they're playing a game, even though they're playing legitimate. They're a little bit too flashy for me. I'd much rather mow somebody down. The fact that he could play both sports like that, the fact that he had the rules changed so that they could have it, be more competitive, lowering the mound. And Greg, can you explain? Well, I'll explain this since you probably could, but essentially it's physics, okay? If the mound is higher, you have a more advantage as a pitcher because not only is it, you have gravity on your side, but there's also more rotation that can be affected on the pitch. It's just a much nastier pitch. If you want to take it to the extremes, imagine that you're at the bottom of a hill and someone's up 15 feet on the hill and pitching downhill. That's kind of the exaggerated portion of it. So if you lower it into where they're closer to where you are, then it is an easier read on the pitch, and they don't have much movement as well on it and as much speed because gravity is negatively affected as it would have been had it been the other way around. But Bob Gibson has always been a thrill to me. I've never seen him pitch. He's, like I said, if he retired in 75, I never would have seen him pitch live. And I just am fascinated by the old school 70s era baseball, the old Orioles, the Cardinals, the A's, those guys. I mean, that era was just a fun time. I remember the Orioles winning championships back in the day, a little bit because I was really young, and the Big Red Machine, those guys, the Reds. So, baseball was glorious back then. And I don't know if we can ever get that back, but Bob Gibson, to me, simply epitomizes all that, and his ethic and his work ethic is just, to me, it's just something we need to talk about. But also, let me ask you this question, because this is kind of off script. I understand that he was angry a lot when he pitched, and a lot of it had to do with some abuses that he got from the media, or did you hear anything about his persona in terms of him being negatively affected by the press or fans or just whatever? Had you heard that?
Yeah, I heard he was kind of prickly. He wasn't somebody that gave a real good interview. Like I said, he had a very serious demeanor. Some of that may have been rooted in the racism that he probably faced in his career. If you're talking St. Louis, because I think he was a rookie like in 1959 for St. Louis. So I'm thinking he probably faced some sort of racist type attacks and pushback. I'd have to read more on that, but I'm thinking if he had some sort of maybe standoffish or prickly attitude towards the media, that may have been the reason why. I mean, Bob Gibson wasn't a warm and fuzzy type guy. I mean, he was all business. Now his teammates, spoke very glowingly of him, but even Tim McCarver, who I mentioned was his catcher back then, whenever McCarver would come out, and for the listeners that aren't aware of this, so during the course of a game, the catcher may come to the pitcher's mound to maybe calm the pitcher down or go over strategy or something like that. It's like a mound visit for the catcher. And McCarver has said when he go out to try to tell Bob Gibson something about, maybe you should throw this, or maybe you should do this better, or something like that. Bob Gibson had the attitude of like, who are you to tell me how to pitch, or who are you to tell me what to do up here? Those may have not been his exact words, but that was his attitude, that he was in charge and there really wasn't anything Tim McCarver could add to what he was doing. But, as a catcher, that's something that you had to do from time to time, was go out and talk to your pitcher for whatever reason, even to just go over the signs. So catchers, if you notice in baseball games, the catchers will use fingers to indicate which pitch they want the pitcher to throw. So, he may go out to the mound to either change the signals or something like that. But he basically said, Bob Gibson let him know that, he was in charge up there. And what more? And basically, what more could Tim McCarver add to that?
Right.
But yeah, I think, and I've seen maybe some suggestions that, Bob Gibson might have been a little bit of an angry guy. I don't know that he actually was. I just think he was just so intense that he didn't leave a lot of room for a lot of levity or foolishness. He was basically just straightforward. What you saw is what you got. And again, considering the era in which he came up,
sure.
As far as what was going on in the country, as far as racism and race relations, he would likely have a reason to be a little bit bitter. But I've not really seen anything overly blatant as something he said or did to allude to that. So, but I think a lot of it was just his seriousness and intensity. And that was still back during a time when baseball was still considered America's pastime. There's a reason for that. That type of talent, that type of, the way the game was played, it was still loved by, so many Americans, before the rise in popularity of the NBA and the NFL. Baseball was the sport. Baseball and boxing. They for decades, those were the two biggest sports in this country. So he played back in an era where baseball was still a big deal. And he was one of the big reasons why.
I recommend people watch the Ken Burns series, Baseball. It's
excellent.
It's a long investment, but
it's excellent.
It is. About the 1968 season, well, you laid it out there perfectly. 1968 was probably one of the most turbulent years in American history.
Yes.
Going back to 1776, I think that's a fair comparison in terms of turmoil. And even, let's say, 1864 was a very, very turbulent year. 68 ain't far from any of those two. I don't know if it's as turbulent because those country could have been gone. I think culturally speaking, it's definitely big. And he had to pitch through that. And in an era where the media was around, we just lost, I'm not sure, King had passed away during that time period. And Kennedy died of
Robert Kennedy,
and Robert Kennedy also passed away. So it was a really, really horrible year. Not to mention the riots and the Vietnam War. But Yep. So, and he's pitching, I guess, in the South at St. Louis. I guess it's Southern, sort of. So there probably was integration going on there. I'm not sure if I didn't research this. This is kind of going off cuff. But yeah, so, and for him to have that kind of focus and have his best season in 68, yes, he was on a mission. He was on a mission, my friend. He was definitely on a mission.
Absolutely.
So I think we covered him pretty well. I don't know if we need to say more about him, but I just wanted to point him out because I'm not sure a lot of people really know how good this guy was. You hear about the Koufaxes, you hear about that, and well deserved. I love Koufax, but I just think Bob Gibson, sometimes you don't hear about him that much. And I think and I think we should. And so anyway, I'll let you say what you want to say, and maybe we can close out here. I think we've done a good service on him and his legacy.
Sure. So if it's possible for somebody to put up those types of numbers and be underrated, especially when you talk about baseball today, I think Bob Gibson would be in that category. To your point, you don't hear a lot of people talk about him anymore, even in the context of today's game. You just don't hear him talked about, I don't think, enough. And anytime a sport changes the rules so you can't be as dominant, I mean, that's saying something. I mean, you can point to players in other sports like Wilt Chamberlain. They changed the rules for him. I think Lou Alcindor, who was later known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I think they outlawed dunking because of him, if I'm not mistaken. So
that's correct.
When you are a player of that caliber to the point where the league changes the rules so you don't dominate,
Tiger some way.
Yeah. So
they didn't change the rules, but they tiger-proof courses by making them longer.
Yeah.
Augusta, after 97, they were like, no, okay, Tiger, we're not going to, because he was crushing it. I didn't cut you off, Greg, but
no.
Tiger as well. Yeah.
That's a good point. And, the Tiger Slam, I mean, yeah, they came up with that because of him winning, I guess, all 4 majors in a calendar year or something like that.
It wasn't a calendar year. It's all he had at one point in time. He had all 4.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, Bob Gibson is certainly the type of player that I would have enjoyed watching, especially if he pitched for my team. So my team is the Phillies, as I've mentioned, and we had a pitcher that you could mention maybe in the same conversation, Steve Carlton. And I think in 1972, when the Phillies only won like 59 games, and Steve Carlton went like 27-10. So he won almost half of the games that the Phillies won that whole season, and he had a very dominant season as well, in spite of playing for a very bad team. So that's the type talent that Bob Gibson had, and again, I wish I had a chance to watch him, but he's certainly somebody that I would love to watch, especially if he pitched for the Phillies. But what he was able to accomplish just transcends just pitching. He was a great baseball player, period. And again, going back to his longevity and being able to dominate for that period of time and pitch that many innings. Now, I think a little later in his career, he may have had some injury issues and did not pitch at that same level as he did, but still, that is a very impressive career. And he is like a once in a generation talent, in my opinion. And I think when you talk about just ability and toughness mentally and physically, and somebody, if you said, okay, it's game 7 of the World Series, who are you giving the ball to? You're giving the ball to Bob Gibson. You just are. And to be that type of talent, to where across different eras you can be mentioned like that, that's very impressive. And again, I think in some ways he's underrated, and it's a shame because he was just phenomenal, and people within the sport certainly appreciate it. But casual fans may not be quite as aware of Bob Gibson, but hopefully this podcast can bring him to the forefront to some people. But yeah, check him out. Check out YouTube. Check out the stats that we just gave, and to put everything into context, and also listen to what his peers say about him. That is the icing on the cake, I think, to have, your peers talk about you like that. So yeah, I would encourage everybody to check all those things out, and my hat's off to Bob Gibson. He was a phenomenal, not just pitcher, but baseball player and athlete. As I recently found out, I mean, he was a great basketball player too. So how many people can say they were a Globetrotter and pitched in the World Series? I'm thinking probably one. So just very impressive. And I'm glad we took some time to give him the props that he deserves.
And he's the most recent recipient of the OGG Award, the Old Glory Games, whatever we're going to call it, along with Ricky Henderson and Pistol Pete Maravich, who we will actually do something on in the future.
Well deserved too.
So, and Greg, you got to pick I picked all the ones so far. You got to pick a few.
Yeah, that'll be my homework.
Maybe you'd be a wrestler. I would like to. We got to do something on boxing. We got to do something on boxing too. By the way, we got so much to cover. I hope you guys are enjoying this podcast. And if you are enjoying this podcast, let us know. Email us at podcast@theconservativetake.com. Any questions you have, please send them to us, and we will answer those questions on our broadcast here. And we will really appreciate that. We are on Spotify. We are on YouTube. Google no longer exists. They merged it with YouTube, but we are on other areas as well, as it's being propagated through RSS and syndication. And so, anything else you want to say, Greg, before I close this out? Or
I think that pretty much wraps it up for me. Again, I'm glad we got a chance to talk about Bob Gibson, and hopefully as time goes on, he'll be remembered a little bit more than I feel like he is right now. But, there was a stretch where he was the absolute man when it came to major league pitching. So, again, hats off to him.
Absolutely. All right, everybody, thank you for checking us out. This is the Old Glory Games podcast. This is episode 16. I can't believe we got this far. Wow, it's 16 episodes. It's incredible. And it's
been great.
Well, yeah, it's been a lot of fun. I've been researching it and learning and trying to bring it back into the focus of conservatism and the way sports, the way I would like to see them. I'm not sure about you, Greg, but I mean, maybe old school. Let's bring some old school back. I understand new school is a thing too, but I think some of the values that we carry, I think, should be moved forward. And I think hopefully this podcast can help to do that. So everybody, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. And for myself and Greg, we will see you guys in the next one.
Thank you.